What does it mean to be a man? Does it mean being the next Andrew Tate, or does it mean exhibiting some of his characteristics while ostracizing undesirable traits that we perceive that he has? Why does it seem to be the opposite of the blue haired squad, whatever that can even mean? And I guess what I mean to ask is just what does it mean to be a man in today's society?
Yeah, where are those real macho men? Those guys you saw in the 80s that were all roided up.
Yeah, there's something to be said about those characteristics that they exude, the macho men.
It really is interesting how it seems like those types of guys, in some ways, they exuded a type of masculinity, something that we would recognize as being masculine, and yet at the same time seem to encapsulate some sort of like inherent parody of themselves.
It's almost sad that it's a parody because there are benefits to being masculine, to being a strong father, a protector, somebody who's going to stand up for a family, for their kids. It seems like they're all producing good results, and yet it seems to be kind of demonized in today's society as like an enemy. It's something that needs to be dismantled, that somehow it's the source of, because you have these benefits, it is also necessarily oppressive. And I don't know if those are actually uh, like you have to take the whole basket.
It's true. It seems like toxic masculinity has this like reoccurring phrase that you hear has just become synonymous with all masculinity. And
Ah,
there's I think the effect in some ways that you have these men now, which can only be described as like sniveling, conniving, ultra beta cucks, um, as almost a response to this rejection of masculinity altogether. So anything that's seemingly masculine, which is funny because, like, in order to even have a conception of man, we do need to define it in some ways. And I think people know in their hearts, kind of, or at least they recognize to some degree, traits that they're being called masculine in order to reverse it, right? Because like the whole point of it is that if you can recognize it, then you could just not do it. Otherwise, you would have a strange layering of people who are trying a bunch of different things. Like if there is no such thing as masculinity, then it doesn't matter what you do because masculinity doesn't exist.
yes, there that is definitely a paradox that uh, is ever present, it seems, in our society, where there are things that are bad and yet they're completely undefined and fluid. And I can be anything, but I also can't define those things. So it's kind of like the reason I can't explain it well is because it doesn't make sense, at least to me. Uh,
That's true because like if you can be, aggressive, arrogant, narcissistic, and willing to use your physical prowess to um, extort other people, and why can't you do all those things and not be a man? Although there's something like interesting about the certain combination of those things that I think people would recognize as being masculine. And certainly those are some of the things that people would, you know, say are toxically masculine. And so I think it's like a interesting sort of conundrum where the traits themselves don't make up the whole, and yet we have a crisis, it seems. And I mean, people want to define shit all the time, but I think the problem with defining something like man is that the sphere is too big and encapsulates so many different um, opposites. Because you could be a man who's very sensitive, you could be a man who's very cold. And why would we just confine our definitions to the median of all of those traits when the truth is that it's a human spectrum that seems to defy the sexes themselves. It's it's almost easier to say is that a man. I mean, like you can't even say this nowadays, but a man cannot seemingly house child and give birth to from a biologically sexual definition.
Yeah, I suppose if you wanted to reel everything in to the core component, the most agreed upon criterion would be they take a genetic sample of you, they run a karyotype on it, and that comes back as XY. XY means man because woman does not have Y. She has XX. And like the Y has like the SRY gene on it, and that has um TDF, testis determining factor, and that means that you are a man. So that's difficult to dispute. So therefore, I think a lot of people can agree on it. Uh, Whereas, like, there are many classes that have traditionally said, if you don't have a uterus, then you can't menstruate, which makes sense to me. But there are professors who are getting in trouble now for saying that men can't menstruate. And there's people online that have pictures, they're holding up a sign, which means that they can now define biological reality and they can say that, men can bleed. And I mean, I have a hard time understanding that. So that's I would say that that's less agreed upon by people as to what defines a man, because if you have a uterus, you're probably a woman, unless you've killed somebody and you've pulled the uterus out of them and you're holding it in your hands. But that's kind of a weird, a technicality there. And
Yeah,
barring some sort of like, go ahead, go ahead.
it's one of those things too that it's like instinctively we seem to have a conception of it, whereas the uh, process of narrowing down and trying to determine just the exact factors, it seems to be a limitation of language in such a way, or more broadly, that encapsulates so much that it's just much easier to recognize that thing as a man. Um, and then it's not even getting down to who is that person too. It's like they're seemingly like um, a way too where you can you can perfectly imagine a man, I would say, like hypothetically, right, that has no masculine traits that we would apply to their like psychological profile. Forgetting about the physicality of it for a second, I think it's interesting in and of itself that like you could still have a man because of it's kind of like because humans are both subject and object, that we can look at the object part of them and just being like, because you can give just like descriptive features. Certain people are 6'4", certain people are 5'3", and these are all descriptions of their object, of their physical presence and being in the world. And so I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily, especially like in how you said too, like there's an easy test to see if you're a man or not. And there's a lot of people too that they look male and I think they have like X0 or something like that. So it's yeah, there's definitely like um an interesting spread of possibilities that all sort of again kind of like bleed into this concept that humans seem incapable of describing.
Yeah, you're definitely hitting a lot of interesting points there. There are certain sociocultural aspects that, when combined with a physical form, you end up with a lot of different permutations. Like when you have just a few basic tastes on your tongue and you have a lot of different scents that you can smell, when you combine a scent with a taste, you get a flavor, and there are thousands of flavors. And we start having like these like compound experiences. And as society changes and we were able to dramatically change the way our lives work with technology and what we're capable of doing with science, maybe uh the truth can be malleable, but at any given point in time, it's still a point. So like right now, um if you yeah, you do like a genetic test on somebody, they're either this or they're that. But me wanting and thinking really hard about I want to change, I cannot exert that physical change yet. Maybe in the future that would be possible, but
Yeah.
it's not currently possible. I can't invert who I am and then suddenly become able to bear a child. Now, maybe you could do something with science in the future where they're somehow able to change my entire hormone production and balance and homeostasis, and I'm able to have like a uterus implanted in me. And at that point, I might be able to consider myself some sort of transsexual being, but that's not the case right now. And as you brought up earlier, just to hit on that real quick, there are interesting things that can happen. Yes, like you can be XO. The O just means that there isn't a second component there. It's just X nothing. So they only got something from uh well, either the sperm or the egg. There was only one X there, but you could also have XXY or you could have XYY. But ultimately, if the Y is there, they're male, and they may have like different presentations of that phenotypically. Phenotype is how I look, but genotype is this doesn't lie. This is not misleading. this this is present. It is empirically present.
Yeah, that's
And
very fair. I'm really glad that you made that distinction because I think, we would rely on if we were to say that, what is this like I was talking about before about like the subject object hybrid, if we're looking specifically at the object of a human being, I think we would have this mix of both of those phenotypical and then genotypical sort of conceptions where we could rely on the genotype to tell us more or less with like the makeup of this person, but at the same time that makeup also doesn't tell us really anything about the subject quality of the person.
yeah, yeah, they could be an asshole, or they could be one of the most kind people you've ever encountered. And
Well,
and
I
again,
was talking. Yeah, no, that's a good point. But I was also talking, I think, more about the masculine characteristics of that
oh,
person.
okay. I just wanted to make sure nobody, because in the audience a lot of times we think like the moment that somebody is not like super normal, they're like, oh, they must be a hero and so brave. It's like no, they don't have to be. There's nothing that's like this special. They're not a superhero just because there's something like wrong with them. And I've always like kind of laughed, and when people have like these terms where they're well intentioned but they're just very misguided and the execution is very poor. Like when I see a certain parking spaces that it's no longer like a just a wheelchair, somebody in a wheelchair, it's somebody racing in a wheelchair, they're racing everywhere, yeah, oh, they're so capable. It's like no, they're not. That's why they're in a wheelchair, because they've lost functionality. It's like yeah, they can do cool shit, they can be Tony Hawk, and there's plenty of people out there you can do a lot of the same things, and maybe you'd win in a downhill race against me, but there's a biological reality, there's a physical aspect to this world. Like somebody that was running on hooks, they had like below the knee amputations or whatever, and they have those hooks. Like those people are faster than like normal people on legs because they're not really running on the same physical components. So in that case, they are. That person is handy capable, but for the most part, they're not because they've been disabled. Maybe they got blown up in Afghanistan or something, fighting for an ungrateful nation, for fighting for our permanent political class. We there's just so much more to this story than this like glorification and inherent heroic attribute that we associate with somebody who doesn't have the same phenotype as everybody else, in the same way that, oh, I love old people. It's like no, they're the same people that you didn't get along with, that were idiots in high school. It's just that now that they're old and they poop in their diapers.
It's not that
Like,
I
I
have
don't
anything
know.
really problematic with any of what you just said. I think it is actually interesting, like the psychology behind it too, where it's like we're purposely we have a choice between having one that's just a basic normal sort of object stationary, and then we have one that has more of an animation to it. But the one that has an animation to it can be polarizing, right? Because it's like you can have people who look at that and are inspired, and you can have people who look at that and feels even worse about their state of being. So it's not like people were necessarily pulled for this. And I don't know the correct answer to it. I'm just saying that there are possibilities that I assume exist in some form or another. Whereas again, it's because we're straying so far from the object side of things that I think that we would have these polarizing issues because it's it's an aesthetic choice, and I think this will loop back interestingly, I think, to what we were talking about before with a little bit like the transhuman element, because I think that there is a section of the population that is looking forward to. Now, I've never really understood. Now, we'll like just say this openly out loud. I never really understood why people are so driven to a transhuman conception of like somewhere being in between male and female as being like ultimate human. I'm not really sure like where that came from. It's like clearly that would have to exist in a very advanced technological age because nature has selected us very clearly for what seems to be the dominant survival strategy, which is having a bimodal distribution and human reproductive capabilities as seen across with other mammals. It probably has a very, important role, and probably it wasn't accidental. And what I mean by that is like not accidental as in there was any sort of grand design involved necessarily, but the fact that survivorship bias has selected for the dominant strategy. You just say the dominant strategy won out in that specific way. So I've always thought that the transhumanist conception is kind of like this. It's kind of like a very basic childish logic. I hate to say it that way. It's like, oh well, people, men have certain characteristics and women have certain characteristics, and if there were somewhere in between, we would have just it would just be the best of all possible worlds. And it's like really, you couldn't see anything possibly wrong with anything in between. Like maybe they're completely ineffectual. Maybe they're not quite as assertive, not quite as smart, not quite as caring. Like they could just be worse, worse versions of male and female instead of being somehow superior to both. That doesn't seem to come about in these conversations. It's just we've seen the future and it's sexless and it's like everyone has this. We're all made from the same mold. It's like,
We're
what, you want to be
just
a bunch of banana trees? It's like you want to be just like a perfectly cloned society in which it seems so hilariously anti-diverse that I can't take it seriously because diversification is truly, if you look at our evolutionary history, diversification is truly our greatest advantage.
I agree, and I think that the current hijacked ideology of what diversity is not what diversity truly is. As you've said in many different ways, we don't want the monoculture. The homogeneity is most domesticated plants' downfall. That's why we don't eat the was it gross Michael banana? I don't know how to pronounce that word anymore, but the original banana that was cultivated massively across the world, it just took one pathogen to pretty much wipe it out of commercial use. And now we all eat the Cavendish banana. And that's just kind of like waiting for the next apocalyptic event. Or I was it Dutch elm disease that took out a bunch of those trees in America. The more uniform something is, the weaker it is against a singular Achilles heel.
Yeah.
And that I believe that evolutionary biologists would explain the bimodal distribution of biological sex with that same explanation, which is we needed more diversity. So we needed ways to mix chromosomes. And that's why sexual intercourse exists because we're not just yeast. We don't just bud and then create this godlike asexual thing that would be Time's person of the year again. because actual diversity is like, it's like diversity in immune strength against things that you don't know that you will fight in the future. It's this really interesting blend. And like right now, like there is no true human hermaphrodite, meaning we're not a worm. I can't impregnate myself. I can't both be fertile in sperm and ovum and create like a unique organism within myself. I also don't do parthenogenesis, which is a bit of a different process, but essentially, if and I don't even know if I fully understand it. I don't know if anybody really understands it, to be honest. But parthenogenesis, basically, when an animal has an ovum, the egg, it's supposed to be fertilized by a sperm, right? Well, if you have like these really interesting environmental pressures, like let's say you are a female Komodo dragon and there's no other males around you, then there's something called a polar body, which is like another egg cell, but it doesn't have the same genetic components in it. And basically, you have a fusion of two of your own egg cells, and it creates a almost identically similar or identical offspring to the mom. So because they're on a biological clock where this mom organism is going to die, like that the sand is running out of the glass, it needs to respawn essentially, but it only has so much time before it senesces, as all life forms do, and it will die. We will all die. So even if you can't create a new genetically unique, diverse organism to take on new challenges, you can at least try to replicate yourself. And that's about as close as it comes with parthenogenesis. But again, that's not even true hermaphroditism. So, and I guess like a way to look at this in a positive light, though, is like the reason that humans fight and argue with reality is because we do want to see what's possible. And I guess that could be a positive thing. We're very good at innovation. No other species dominates like we do. We've created so many amazing technological revolutions. I just think that sometimes our conclusions are not quite as grandiose as we think we are, and we're not quite as heroic as we think we are. But we're definitely innovative, even if it means believing a lie. It's like in math, you use these imaginary numbers that somehow make your equation work. They're like a fudge factor. It's like, well, if you like kind of, squint and then like shake the paper, then the math works out. And somehow you can still get results. So I think that maybe our own logic, we kind of fudge our own fuzzy logic, and then it helps us roll the dice and figure out some strange serendipitous discoveries that ultimately are beneficial in the strangest of ways, just by having enough monkeys clacking on a keyboard.
Right. And I think there's also something to be said where people they don't imagine that there's like power vacuums and niches. Something that I want to talk about real quick is that there's been articles out where they're like, do we even need men anymore? Because I think, they're talking about more or less this parthenogenesis, but just in the case of the human female, if we could technologically get to that way, and their idea was that somehow society would be more peaceful if it was just all female. And I think something that isn't really thought of is the fact
There would
that
be no backstabbing at all. Everyone would be
yeah,
best friends, wouldn't they?
yeah, wouldn't they? Like, like I'm not sure who wrote these articles or if they've ever had female friends, but
There's never
um,
any competition among females.
yeah, my stepmother and my mother, or I'm sorry, my mother-in-law, my grandmother-in-law, and my mother get along perfectly, right? It's just everyone has that common conception. But the funny thing is too, it's like there's so many things wrong with that conception if you just thought about it for maybe 5 seconds. But some of these people don't, so I will do that for them. Um, you could easily think that
That's all hubris.
as soon as there's a mass extinction of anything that's a top predator in the society, slowly that vacuum gets filled. Like clearly, we've seen this in evolution before. We have seen tiny animals blow up to be gigantic animals in absence of certain predators, or to take the place of lead predator. And you had things that were originally herbivorous become carnivorous in order to fill a niche or expose an opportunity. So it's, I think you would have masculine traits because masculine traits have a sort of domineering quality to them. They will creep back up. So like I wouldn't be surprised if you saw females start to exhibit like now with parthenogenesis. Obviously, if we're talking about just copies of people, um, the more masculinized ones, the ones that you could say that are at least closer to having those traits will win out because at that point in time too the like there's no need for cooperation. Like why would you need cooperation at that rate? That's why I always thought the hermaphrodite thing was a very odd contradiction. It's like you think that you could bring society together by making everyone able to live without anyone else. It'll have exact opposite
Uh,
effect. Like we're already seeing that now with people who have poor social skills, especially men. Like men have extremely poor social skills now. They're able to get most of what they need from the fucking internet. So what I'm claiming there is that we probably are seeing something like um the we're like resting at the lowest level of energy in our systems all around. Um, but there would certainly be trade-offs if any one of those massive pillars were to be removed. Like men, you would just have more masculinized women doing their parthenogenesis, stealing and destroying probably the weaker women in that model.
there
Like
are,
they're yeah.
yeah, I think you really nailed it. There are evolutionary pressures that are inherent in reality because we didn't get to choose this giant planet that we're on, like this game, this existence, this experience. Uh, we probably have just a limited amount of control over ourselves and others, and society requires cooperation. And no one really knows exactly why any of this is occurring or why there is, changing life forms over time, adaptation over time, however you want to describe it. Um, why there were dinosaurs and now they're not. Uh, there are many questions, but things that I think obviously happened. And it's weird that we just like to kind of ignore all of it and focus on um, when I can have, or I'm going to force everybody to accept that I want to have drag school, like drag shows in front of children or something. Like we're fixating on weird things in society. And there does seem to be some sort of, well, like, where is this competition coming from? This like sense of urgency to dominate others and not only live the way that I want to live, but force others to accept and also live the way that I want them to live. Like I want to be the director of how everyone else lives, but there's so many chefs in the kitchen and too many quarterbacks on the field that I think the other phrase is like too many Chiefs and not enough Indians. But also like I don't know, we're in a I'm trying to make a weird statement on society where we're just really fighting against reality for some reason, and I don't know what the goal is, and I don't know why that is their goal of having some weird sexless society. And but even though we want there to be a sexless society, we also want to get rid of all males so only women will exist. But if that were to occur, then are women sexless, or we're just going to have only women? I don't know. I'm left with far more questions than I have answers.
No, I completely agree. It's a very strange sort of but I mean like we've heard these things all over the place. I think there are a lot in science fiction and people talk about them online. I would even go so far as to say that it's a dominant mode of thinking that somehow in a transhumanist future that will have some sort of you know sexless quality. I think it's also interesting that the same people who would be against race blindness in society are suddenly for sex blindness, and I find that to be
The identity politics Olympics.
yeah, the whole thing is very odd. I mean, like I definitely think within a few hundred years in the United States, it's you would certainly see a lot less of the I just don't think there's going to be as many of the like pure racial qualities you could think of, because people will be. I don't think that we have a racial problem in the United States. I'm going to just say that openly out loud. Like even if there is systematic problems at certain levels, I think they're definitely more classist, but they may affect certain races more, right? Like that's just how the statistics will lay out for now. But I'm talking about a few hundred years from now. I think that we will have more of a, you know, diverse way. We'll have a diverse genetic component to the United States.
There should be more genetic diversity as time goes on. Yeah, as there's more and more people in society, and assuming we all have a singular origin, which it's hard for me to accept theories that there are multiple origins across the globe simultaneously for man, as in humans. I think that we all had a singular origin and then kind of spread out in a diaspora. So, because of that assumption, which I believe to be true, there is no such thing as 100% of any race because we all can be traced back to a singular origin. And there is something super powerful about the inherent biological nature of us that it's weird when one biological sex wants to dismantle the other and say, well, we just, men are just sperm. So once we can get this, like, if we could somehow manufacture sperm, well, it's like, well, okay, then if we could just manufacture a synthetic uterus, then we wouldn't need women either. It's like that's not the point. The point is not to try to like eliminate one of the biological sexes. Uh, there might be something interesting about how you could improve a reproductive process, but it seems like a really bad motive. It's a really bad intention to say that,
Yeah,
like, I want to eliminate 50% of the population because they're bad and we would be better off without them.
it reminds me of that example that I used before in a different podcast where it's like these same people, in order for the name of progress to continue, they can't possibly imagine that there can be a small adjustment on an already like very useful social construct that we already have that would make things very, like that would run very smoothly, because it's like you're throwing away the idea of a car just because you had a car that breaks down. It's like all cars will break down eventually. It doesn't mean that the idea of a car is necessarily bad or not useful. So I think there's like like having men around, to do a lot of heavy lifting and stuff. It's like even though we've had um even if you can't say we've had complete parity of you know, male and female occupations to converge exactly the same. We've had quite a bit of movement on that, at least compared to 100 years ago. So what I'm saying here is not necessarily groundbreaking, but at the same time, you don't see a lot of women doing, like, there's definitely more in the realm of like construction work and sewage work and stuff like that. But I mean, like, there's no substitute for a big ape to go up on the power line and do some things that, like, a man just can do. I mean, I use this example that my my brother's a carpenter, and there are women on his team that are perfectly capable, very wonderful construction workers. The thing is that because they don't have the same upper body musculature, it's hard for them to do certain things, or it takes more of them to do the same task as a man would. And you're talking about like if you're a building company with a limited budget, it's better to just have a few of those stronger apes on board, right? But I mean, like, that could go with anything. Like sometimes you just need taller people to do a job. Sometimes you need smaller people to do a job. Sometimes you need people with smaller hands to do certain technical things, and you need people with bigger hands to hold on to something, for a period of time while, like, I don't know, if you're using like a giant pair of like a giant wrench or something on a boat, you just screw in like one of those giant bolts. Maybe you just need a certain type of human to do that. And the cool thing is that we just have a wide variety of people to do all these different tasks. But it's because we have this like biological, this morphic quality to our beings that you'll see certain jobs only kind of going in certain directions. Now, is that to say that that should forbid anyone from doing those jobs? I mean, absolutely not. But, we're just talking about the truth of the situation here.
And what you're highlighting then is going back to what we have both been saying, which is this is actual diversity. That's true diversity. Diversity in attributes affords a wide variety of specialization. If we're all just jack of all trades, master of none, then you don't have those wins. We can't get those gains because everybody is like not nobody's too small, nobody's too big, like as you were saying. And some other examples would be you have to be under a certain height to be a fighter jet pilot. So you can't be Andre the Giant. You just won't fit in that plane. So you can't have that job. And what if you're on like, I don't know, some like little tiny submarine and you're exploring part of like the Mariana Trench for something, like you got to be a smaller person. And yeah, I mean, like more power to you if you want to try to play in the NBA as somebody with a height of 5'2". It's like, yeah, you could. You might be very talented, but guess what? You're going to get dunked on by everybody who's over 7 feet tall. That's just how
Like
it is.
literally.
Yeah, and that's not racist. That's not sexist. That's not phobic. That's just that's reality.
No, I like it's actually even better to just talk about these things out in the open too, because we need all of that. It's like, don't you want to have a very vibrant and diverse society? Like this is how it comes about. Um, and yeah, so it's just like it's wild to me that some of these things are. I think like now it's probably important then to talk about the qualities that we necessarily think about when we think about the psychology of men then, because I would say that we need, if your country is going to war, you want men with bad behavior to go out there and fight for you. You want to be the winner in that case. It is a all or nothing, life or death situation. And yet at the same time, not everyone in society has to be that way, right? Like you want to have those more gentle personalities. Like I can think like the male English teacher who is, wonderful at making kids self-actualize in their teen years has just as important of a role as like an army ranger who doesn't like to talk to people and likes to live in the field and hunt down the enemy. You know what I mean? Like there's just the plurality and diversity is present within men. So I think it's like very ham-fisted to be like, well, what is a man? And a man necessarily has to have these sorts of dynamic qualities to it. Do men in general have to be pretty capable? I would say yes. Like I think that kind of goes along with like that protectorship role, that provider role. There's a certain amount of toughness that I think men need to procure, even if we are feeling comfortable in a modern age, because I think we're only as capable as our toughness allows in those more dire situations. We have to always not be worried about regression, but we have to worry about, our capital isn't indestructible and our systems aren't indestructible. And so for us to be hedging, if we want to make a society that is more flexible and able to bounce back, then I think we need to consider having that sort of like assertion that you can, um, apply to men, because it's like that's the baby in the bathwater that you throw out. If you want to say like you want men with zero aggression, you're going to have men with zero assertion. And I think that's not good in a society that needs to keep tabs on everything that's going on. We're inherently a deceptive species too. Like that's another part of us that we can't deny. We need to check other people's work. We need to have systems in place that allow us to do our checks and balances. And assertion is necessary for that role. Like the reason why, and I've heard this from psychologists and sociologists, the reason why a lot of education models and a lot of factory models are based around women is because they are relatively more able to be controlled than men, which is why men are doing so poorly in school nowadays That's kind of like one of the reasons given. Let's say it's because they're being treated like women because they want to be controlled by the systems in place. Now, if you're someone who is critiquing the system, that's not, like you want revolutionaries that have some sort of assertion in them, right? So like even the people on the side that I wouldn't necessarily say that I share my economic or political view with, they would have to agree with me here. Like you can't have people incapable of doing action and crumbling under fear if you want to revolutionize things.
And it seems like they have a loss of direction, which is like in a society that doesn't really know what path they should take. Maybe part of that's like there is no initiation transition into manhood. It's just like we're just given so much. It's a relatively easy lifestyle compared to back in the day. I mean, like how many young men are actually working in factories where they might get their fingers chopped off or just have like crazy accents? I'm not saying that those are good things, but
Right.
hard times make tough men. And if you're just in mom's basement and you don't pay rent and she makes all your meals and you are not fighting anything, there's no adversity in your life. And the most conflict that is in your life comes from online internet battles, and you're just like swiping on social media apps or scrolling on TikTok with like just hundreds of 5 to 10 second audio video clips and just getting those dopamine hits like you're at the slots in Vegas or something. And then you just like, I don't know, it's how does that prepare you for when you have real conflict in life, when you have a big boy job? What about when you encounter someone who uses force on you, sudden use of force, someone grabs you by the collar, somebody wants to take something from you that you have, they won't know how to respond because they're
Right.
not prepared. They're going to crumble. They're going to pee their pants. They're going to just, there's fight, flight, or freeze. A lot of people, they'll freeze up and they will
Mhm.
not have a reaction and they will be victims. And that will be
And
sad.
yeah, absolutely. And like, what if they are in charge of someone less capable than they are? Like, even after you painted such an incapable human being, there's like certainly toddlers and children, and there are just people of even less capability that may be dependent on them, and they're completely unprepared. I think one of the things too to kind of like briefly mention is that I'm not saying that this is capable for all men, because you need to have sensitive people of all types to be doing different types of labor. You know, like otherwise, I don't think you'll have good artwork. I don't think like a lot of scientists aren't giant macho men. All right, but like we still need their type of intellectual labor in our society, and we certainly profit from it. Having all these sorts of like they are definitely the ones who have contributed to our comfort, just like the big tough men who built the factories to begin with. And so, like going back to that diversity and plurality, um, it is true also though to say on the other hand, because like I'm just trying to give the devil its due here. Like I definitely think that there is something to this diversity thing, having like a large spectrum. However, that being said, we still need to have the median man to be, sort of typified as a capable, tough human being, because that guy living in his mom's basement isn't a good candidate for making more human beings. And like the
It,
whole project, the whole endeavor of being a human society will crumble at the hands of extreme freedom that I like I think that it's not necessarily a good I don't always think more freedom is a good thing. Let's put it that way. I'm not in favor of controlling people, but I also think that there are natural limits on these things that are just like, okay, it's like, well, if we just let everyone do anything that they want, then we probably won't have a society for very long.
I wonder if one of the reasons for this is this weird, perpetual, never ending cycle of education, of formalized education. People are just in school for so long that by the time they get out, they're well into their adult years, and because they've encountered quote unquote the real world later in life, they're learning all these life lessons or being presented with an opportunity to learn life lessons almost too late. And I think about all these, 25 to 30-year-old males that are still living at home. If you went back 50 years in time, even, and humans have been around for a while, all those 25-year-old men would well be into fatherhood. And just think about all these cucks in the basement, or the do nothings, the lazy people. They're addicted to pharmaceuticals for antidepressants because they claim they have some sort of mental health issue, and maybe they have like a poor friend group who is just like them. But it's a bunch of losers basically, but they don't have to be. I'm just saying, like, that's the description. Not They're not inherently losers, they're just kind of choosing to be losers, or they're on a losing pathway. Well, these people are not the same 25-year-olds of 50 years ago. We need those macho men to be the protector and to be a hero to some degree, to protect kids. I mean, anybody that's 30 years old doing hashtag adulting, like they're, look at me, I was able to do something that an adult might do. It's like I could never imagine my father using the hashtag adulting at 30 years old, and he's been married and had kids, and he's not a man boy, he's a man. He's a full man. He is a protector. You don't necessarily have to be the breadwinner, but you can have this dual, um, a two-parent household, and they can be equal in power. But the commonality is they are adults. They're not children. Children are
I,
not in charge.
yeah, yeah,
Children don't
absolutely.
have the strength. Children can't see evil and stop evil. Does this, like, really mentally unfit, medically unfit person, when they're in public and somebody takes their kid, what are they going to do? Are they just going to freak out and just start, like screeching and call for someone else to do something about it? Like, there are measures in place for other members of society to help them. But if too many people are on the wagon and not enough people are pushing the wagon, then the wagon doesn't go anywhere. You can't just rely on someone else all the time and, call for the police. That's fine. We do have police and they are here to help us for the most part. But you also have to be, we're just like relinquishing our self-reliance. And I think that that's a dangerous
Yeah,
vulnerability.
yeah, and I think too often we're dealing in absolutes when the whole air, like the whole part of wisdom, is really just going through that gray area. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it's not important to not have opinions on these things. At the same time, it's very important to constantly be zooming in and out, looking at details, reflecting on things. Like the wisdom aspect is such an underplayed part of masculinity, where it's always the power and the toughness and the bravado. And it's like, well, how about, just taking a fucking second to think about things, and to reflect and to cool down and to be the guy who doesn't resort to, ape rage at every situation. It's, that's just as important of qualities to procure. Although it's kind of funny because you see that sort of like ape rage too inside the kids living in their mother's basements. It's kind of like this juvenile thing, It's
They
sure
don't
they're
have
very
discipline.
passionate. Yeah, yeah. They don't have discipline. They don't have like a mental toughness. One that does that is more, I guess you would say, like akin to like having a thick skin.
Yeah,
They're not.
you need to be able to walk softly and carry a big stick. That is also masculinity, is
Yeah.
having that strength and choosing to exercise restraint. And if necessary, use the ape rage.
Yes, yeah. Having the ape rage is a great power that you can tap into. Absolutely. And I do agree with that. I think that is important to procure and to have as a backup. But it just can't be the go-to, because that is fundamentally interfering, I think, with like the main goal in society is to be cooperative. And there are certain elements of masculinity that are anti-cooperative, but there are certain aspects of anti-cooperativeness that help cooperation. Like I was talking about before with checks and balances. You want the guy who's a tough auditor going in. You don't want a pushover going in there. If a factory is dealing with a bunch of procedural no-nos and you're getting people damaged from it. Let's say it's a food factory and they're not checking for salmonella or any of these different or they're not sterilizing things. You know what I mean? Like you want at least an assertive human being to be the person to go in there and be like, this shit has to stop now.
Yep,
And
we can't
that
have the we don't want a cuck auditor who's going to be pushed over. Hey man, I'm trying to run a business here. You can't say bad things. Oh, okay, sir. I'll say that you passed all the exams. No problem here, sir. No problem. Would you like me to lick your rectum too?
it's great because but at the end of the day too, you're saying that it's an anti-cooperative behavior to like say the opposite or whatever. But it's like at the same time, like that's such an important and useful aspect, and you could say that on the whole, it makes for a cooperative society, right? Like having some of those individuals at those key points. So that goes along with the diversity. The diversity is kind of like holding everything in balance. And I think balance is kind of what we're striving for here. We're not dealing with absolutes. We're not dealing with gigantic shifts. Like there's wisdom from a lot of, in some ways, I would say like conservative wisdom about what traditional masculinity is, because I think it covers so many different domains that if you're thinking too much in one particular one, you may miss a trade-off. And so it's just a strategy that's been around for a while that we should lean into and think about very carefully. And yet at the same time, we don't want to go whole hog into it because, like I said, you could be missing other things. We need diversity of spirit. Like I think a lot about horror writers, how horror writers have to be the people who are most capable of feeling fear. Otherwise, you wouldn't get like realistic writing from it. Because if you had someone who's completely fearless, they couldn't write a horror book believably. At least I don't think, because the characters wouldn't act like someone who's afraid if you're incapable of feeling fear. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that sounds a little off. Maybe it is a little off. I don't know, but in my head, it makes a certain sort of sense. So
Yeah, it
it's
makes
like,
sense.
do we really want to have a society in which we're completely incapable of having art that, um, you know, exposes us to like interesting new truths about or insights into humanity, or to remind us of our humanity, because we were just so focused on making unstoppable uh, members of our, like trying to be unnecessarily socially restrictive.
It does seem like instead of advancing, making any sort of like normal advancement, we've decided to choose to try to dominate others and control others and other people's lifestyles, which is like an easy way out. I don't know. It's like a weird misdirection. I don't know how to describe it, but it's definitely not a collective effort to advance forward. And I'm sure that people will make all sorts of excuses as to why that is, but they could just not do that. It's like, how about you just stop doing that?
I do instinctively think that there is something to be said about the difference between natural and artificial selection, where artificial selection is very good at having certain traits that are needed for a certain type of job, but like natural selection covers instinctively the entire domain, because we're just talking about like what is surviving and what isn't. So sometimes I wonder and I fear that the transhumanist sort of endeavor is inherently short-sighted, because they're claiming to be you know wholly conceptualized across all domains, but they can't be because I don't think human knowledge and intellect covers all domains. It's it's kind of the difference of like theoretically being a lawyer and actually being a lawyer.
Well, in theory, there's no difference between in theory and in practice.